the problems we face in the real world. So while they're useful, and we'll talk about some in this class, we'll also make sure to talk about the shortcomings of economic models, about how they're different from reality. So like I said, economics is the study of human action. And anytime there's choice involved for people, we can use the tools of economics to understand what they're doing, what's going on. Now this framework, it applies to all humans at all times. As we discuss about the different things that go into decision making, it applies whether you're buying and selling in the market. That's what we normally think of economics, is me going and buying something from a company. But it also comes to politics. We can use it to understand the incentives that politicians and voters face, which we'll talk about a little bit at the end of class. We talk about crime, about how incentives face crime. So for instance, if you're more likely to get caught by the cops, are you going to be more or less likely to commit a crime? You'll be less likely because there's a greater chance of you being apprehended, so there's a greater cost associated with it. You can use it for family interactions. George Stigler did that back in like the 60s or 70s. Religion, there's been growing study of how religions actually compete against each other, just like their firms, trying to get more adherence to the faith. And this framework applies at all times, so not just in modern day. Back during the Roman Empire, they suffered from a hyperinflation of their currency. A few years ago, Zimbabwe suffered from a hyperinflation of their currency. And the same sorts of things were going on in both of those episodes. So this is more than just like how to save money or what the stock market will do. This is about how decisions in various parts of the economy affect the allocation of resources. And they can do it in ways that raise or lower the well-being of society. Obviously, we hope that the allocation of resources that we have will raise the material well-being of society. So Henry Ford invents the assembly line. We now can use fewer resources on building cars, so we can use those resources for other things. Suddenly the economy's better off, we have a higher standard of living. But we can also make mistakes, we can waste things, and end up giving ourselves a lower quality of life. Our society worse off. So here's some typical economics questions, and these are the kind of things that we'll talk about in class, and by the end, hopefully, we'll be able to answer. So first is, how are the prices of goods and services determined? And we'll use very simple models to understand it. How does pollution affect the economy? And how should government policy deal with these effects? Why do firms engage in international trade? And how do government policies affect international trade? And why does the government control the prices of some goods and services? And what are the effects of those controls? At the end of the semester, we'll talk about some more fun things that you wouldn't expect in an economics class. So we'll talk about witch trials in Europe. We'll talk about gypsy law, about how gypsy societies organize themselves and why they do it that way. We'll talk about how the British used the longbow in like the 1200s. Like 1200s to the 1400s, I think. The longbow was like the best weapon like militaries had in Europe. And Scotland and France kept fighting them, but kept refusing to adopt the longbow. So why would they keep fighting and refuse to adopt military technology that nowadays, if someone develops a better weapon, immediately all the other armies have to copy it, or else they'll be destroyed. But why didn't they back then? Go through one more fun thing, but whatever, we can get to that later. Are any of you guys interested in Bitcoin, like cryptocurrencies in general? Okay, we may talk about that. I have a funny story about it, so I try to talk about it in class just so I can tell that story. So, the three key economic assumptions. The first is methodological individualism. So when we're in this class, we're focusing on the individual of the unit of analysis. In sociology, oftentimes you look at groups of people and how these groups interact, but you can really lose a lot when you're focusing on groups. So we're going to focus on individual, how one person deals with another person. Let's see. Normally the example I give for this is mafia movies. don't know if any of you guys are fans of mafia movies. Typically, it's the Italian mafias they show, but they're normally some sort of conflict with the Irish mafia. There's one movie in particular called Kill the Irishman. That's like a less famous one. And if you were just looking at groups, you could look at how the Italians and the Irish didn't like each other for decades and decades in this country. And that would give you a decent amount of knowledge to go off of. But you'd be missing the personal conflicts between these people that really drove the fight in Kill the Irishman. So what we're going to focus on in this class is individuals, because all social and economic phenomena, all these events that occur, all these changes, emerge from individuals' actions and their interactions. If you guys remember the financial crisis, you could think of that as banks doing things and people investing in buying houses they shouldn't. But that entire event all came from individuals acting. Each individual thought, no, I can't afford this house. And every single loan officer convinced those people that they could afford a house. And then they turned around and then sold that to someone else so they didn't have to worry about the risk. And each individual regulator turned a blind eye or thought it was okay. So if we want to understand what's going on, we really have to look at what individuals are doing. I just want to drive that home. The next is purposeful action. Individuals act consciously in order to achieve their wants. We're not doing random things. We're not just like bouncing around. We're not choosing things we're not deliberately choosing things that don't achieve our wants. When we have a desire, when we have a purpose, we act in order to achieve that end. So now, sometimes what we say we want and what we really want are two different things. There's an idea of stated versus revealed preferences. That's not something you need to know right now, but the basic idea is we may say we want to lose weight, but then we'd actually rather deep down have that dessert. So that's why we have that dessert. We don't lose the weight. And the last three, or key economic assumption, is economizing behavior. So people consider the costs and the benefits of their actions. And they seek their desired ends at the lowest possible cost. So say there's two routes to get to a certain location. One takes a half hour longer. Odds are you're going to take the shorter route, the quicker route, because it gets you there with a lower cost. You're spending less on gas, spending less time in the car, unless for some reason you like the route. So you may not be right. We're not saying that people are robots that always know what's the right answer. It's that they consider the costs and benefits as they see it, and then they act that way. So it may not be right for you. It may turn out that what you've done is wrong. It's a higher cost or lower benefit than you thought of ahead of time. Who's ever had buyer remorse and bought, a shirt, and it shows up and you don't like it? Yeah. These things happen. It's not that you're being irrational or you're being wrong. It's that you're not economizing behavior properly. It's just the fact that you were wrong. You perceive the costs and benefits differently. But at the time, you thought it was right. And it may not be the best for others. So I think this is where I use this example. Some people like really cheap light beer. Whether it's Coors Light, Milwaukee Special Reserve Light, things like that. They'll buy a 30 rack of that for $12, and they'll have fun. Whereas other people will only drink real fancy IPAs, have two of those. So my friend who's real mature and he wants to have 2 IPAs, sip on them, and have a good evening, he may think I'm completely irrational for drinking a 30 rack of Special Reserve, which, for guys that don't know, is an extremely, extremely cheap light beer. That doesn't mean I'm acting irrational, that I'm not economizing behavior, because for me, drinking that beer has a very high benefit and a low cost. Whereas my friend thinks I'm crazy. He thinks that'd be incredibly costly, because even though it's very cheap, he thinks it tastes like garbage. So people can have different goals. They can have different perceptions of costs and benefits at the same time, and both be right for themselves. Now here are some of the guideposts for economic thinking. The first is scarcity. Like we talked about earlier, the lack of resources to meet the wants of everyone. And this sounds kind of simple. It sounds like, yeah, we know there's only so much oil in the world, there's only so many hours in the day. But this is far-reaching implications for what we're going to do here. And this is basically why economics exists. If there were unlimited resources, then no one would ever have to make a choice. But unfortunately, that's not the case. So because of that, because there's only so many hours in the day, you have to decide if you want to go out to a restaurant or want to go to the movies. You can't do both in the evening after work. But yeah, we have unlimited desires, but there's limited means to achieve those. And this also affects the idea of production. When firms are deciding how much to make or how to make it, they have to bid away resources from other uses. So if you use, so much coal in this industry, you don't have it to use in this other industry. So that's how you see changes in prices for resources that go into production, and that ends up affecting the prices of goods that you end up buying. Now, there's a difference between scarcity and poverty. These aren't the same thing, even though they seem similar. So you can get rid of poverty. Poverty is just an arbitrary line that we say, like, if you're below this, you don't have enough. Your material well-being isn't high enough. But as long as you're above that, then you're living okay. Scarcity is just the lack of resources to meet everyone's needs. So as over time, as people become wealthier, as the world becomes more advanced, the standard of living, the line of poverty changes. So people 100 years ago in the United States living in poverty didn't have electricity, didn't have running water, although a lot of what we call middle-class people didn't have electricity or running water 100 years ago. They didn't have automobiles. Obviously, no one had televisions back then. No one had internet or smartphone. Nowadays, people living below the poverty line will have things like electricity and running water, but they'll have appliances that only the richest had back then. So over time, it's going to change based off how rich the society gets. So if you have an absence of poverty, everyone's met a basic standard of living. You say you need this to have a decent life, and everyone's got it. But can anyone imagine what the absence of scarcity is like? Unlimited resources, but you'd still have only so much time to enjoy those. So we'd also have to be immortal. Yeah. So this existence of scarcity, it requires rationing. You've got to figure out some way to ration these goods. So we have to determine what are the best uses of resources, and then we have to determine who gets to consume those. So for finished goods, it's individuals. Which individuals are going to get what, how many are they going to get? And then for like the natural resources and for certain types of products that go into producing a final product, firms are going to need to compete to figure out how to allocate those resources. Typically, we use markets and prices to ration. So we sell goods on a free market, and then we let the price move up and down based on who wants them. That tends to work pretty well. Like, can you guys think of other ways that we use to ration goods? Or that we could use? What's that? Hold on. I'm sorry, I can't really hear that. Oh, yeah. Can you think of other ways we can ration goods besides like using the market and prices? Well, there's one big example from, I guess that was a big deal through the 20th century. was that?
The ration gas.
Your gas ration. How do they deal with gas rationing?
Yeah, I'll let it get some.
You can only have so much, and you can only go every other day based off of what your the ending number on your license plate was. So that was an example of, I guess that was example of two different things. One is central planning, so where the government determines what resources to use, how to use them, and then who gets what. The other example was first come, first served. So whoever shows up first gets those resources. But there's plenty of other ways we can do it. We can do it by height. Tallest people get first pick. See a few of you in here, you'd like that because you're pretty tall. Other people, not so much. You think of any other weird ways? Yeah, you can do it by like hair length, by eye color. Like there's, you do it by who's friends with the people that own the resources. I'm not saying these are good ways. These are just alternate ways that we can ration goods and determine who gets what. The next guidepost, competition's everywhere. So because there's limits on what we have, or what we can't get everything we want, we have to choose between alternatives. And that gives rise to competition. So there's only so many resources to build Apple phones and Samsung phones. So the people who produce those have to compete to buy resources. The way they compete in the market is they offer to pay more. So it's going to drive up the price until one of them says, well, it's not worth it to pay more for this. So they're going to compete against each other. But even in a world without greed, if we're not imagining production or anything like that, competition would still exist. So if you're trying to donate to charity, you donate to the Red Cross or Relay for Life. Well, those two charities are going to have to compete for your donations. They're going to have to prove that they're better, or that they're better getting the money to people, that the need that they're trying to solve, or the problem they're trying to solve, is a bigger problem than the other ones. They have to prove why they deserve the donation more. So there's still going to be competition, even when we're not talking about production like in the market. And changing the method of rationing doesn't eliminate competition. It only changes the type of competition and what you're competing for. So in the Soviet Union, even though they were a centrally planned economy, even though it was the government determining how much should be produced, what should be produced, how they should produce it, there was still competition. It was just a different form of competition. You had to convince the production committee that your product was more important, that steel was more important than iron. I don't know. There was still a limit on the resources, so they still had to find a way to compete to determine who got what. How much would you get? All right. We've been talking for a while. Let's take a break for a minute or two. Something I like to do in class, because people can really only pay attention for like 12 minutes, and then they start zoning out. Is like take a break, give you guys a chance to ask me like a random question, whether it's about class or like anything. You guys don't have any, I normally ask you something, but it's normally something fun, like favorite movies or stuff like that.
What are you doing in free time?
In my free time?
Yeah.
I'm pretty damn boring. I like to read, like to work out, get sucked into like a new TV show. Have any of you guys seen Brooklyn Nine-Nine?
Yeah.
Is it funny?
Yeah.
Anyone else seen it? Is it good?
Yeah, pretty good.
I've had two friends tell me like I have to get into it, and I just haven't got around to watching it yet. So that'll probably be like my next one. Everyone around here loves Trailer Park Boys. Anyone else trailer park boys? Normally a couple people per class, they say that to me. They swear by it. My first class, I put in like 1,000,000 It's Always Sunny references, and like no one watched it. So everyone just sat there confused and stuff. Oh, I can't get enough of it. All right. So on to the next guidepost, opportunity cost. So opportunity cost, this is an important idea. Opportunity cost is the cost incurred by not enjoying the benefit associated with the best alternate choice. So in plain English, when you do something or when you buy something, it's the next best alternative. So let's say St. Francis was your number one choice for college. Your opportunity cost for attending here would be the next best option. So say you were looking at Penn State and decided this was slightly better because we're doing in-person classes maybe. Or maybe you wanted to go to a place that was less fun. I don't know. Maybe you laugh, but I mean it's true. That would be the opportunity cost. Now, because of scarcity, that's why we have opportunity cost, because you have to choose between different things. There's always something that you're going to be giving up or something you're not choosing to do. And this is going to be subjective because the alternative isn't actually acted upon. So like for each person, it's going to be different because each person faces different choices. They have different wants and different desires and all that. And because it's not acted upon, it's still in your mind. So you're really the only person that truly knows what your opportunity cost is. But we can pretty much guess what people's opportunity costs are. So for education, you have an explicit cost of education. Obviously, the tuition you pay here is a lot of money. That's going to be a cost. The books that you buy, the few that you do, that's going to cost you money. The time that you have to give up, I'm sure you'd all rather be doing something now than sitting here. Probably mostly sleeping, right? It's still 9 a.m. Yeah, you're giving up sleep to be here, or just to be in college in general. You have to stay up late studying. But there's also opportunity cost. There's lost income you could have made. You could be working for a job now making, say, $30,000 a year. So that's factored in to your cost. And like I said, going to Penn State or going to a different university, that's an opportunity cost. Maybe missing out on a vacation because you're here this week, you can't go down, can't really go anywhere. Apparently bars are still open in Florida, so you could be down in Florida, but you're not. These are all the opportunity costs, all things that you have to give up because of the choice you made. So now, opportunity cost has several implications. The first is marginal analysis. And by marginal, we mean the next unit. So when we study the costs and benefits in economics, we look at the cost and the benefit associated with the next unit. So not what is the benefit of all the food you eat in your life. It's what's the benefit of that next hoagie. So now, marginal benefit is the benefit you gain from the next unit of whatever good you consume. And marginal cost, exact opposite. It's the cost of that next unit you consume. So because we don't make all or nothing choices, we choose to consume one more of something, one more unit of something. This is the focus of economics. This is what we're going to do. So as this relates to opportunity cost and marginal analysis, what does this mean? Individuals engage in activity when the expected marginal benefit exceeds the expected marginal cost. Now remember, this is expected. This is what someone thinks ahead of time. They guess, I'm really going to like this shirt. I like it more than what I can buy, what else I can buy for this $20, so I'm going to buy it. It may not be the case. They can be wrong, but in that moment, they expect that the cost is going to exceed the benefit, so they're going to do it. Conversely, individuals won't do an activity when the expected marginal cost exceeds the expected marginal benefit. So if it's going to cost them more, if they have to give up more than they're going to get from something, they're not going to end up doing it. Yeah. Now, obviously, we can do this with products, but this has implications for like all human activity. So if we think of voting, if it becomes more costly to vote, say it's raining, people are less likely to vote when it rains because the expected cost has increased and the benefit, has stayed the same. If we make it more costly to run a charity, say a soup kitchen faces like a new regulation that they have to, put in a new stove or something, that all of them have to put in like a fancy new stove. We'll see less soup kitchens because it's more expensive to run it, so people will do less of it. Let's say we remove a regulation against polluting, and we make it relatively less costly to pollute. We'll expect more people, or in this case probably more firms, to end up polluting because this is less costly of an activity. So we change the expected marginal cost or the expected marginal benefit of an action. We can expect how often, how much people engage in activity, we can expect that to change. This has wide-ranging implications for economics and for how we study what people do or what firms do. This does not mean it's easy to predict other people's actions because individuals weigh expected costs and expected benefits differently. If you're friends with someone or a family member, someone you're close to, you know how they think, it can be fairly easy to predict what they're going to do. But if you're talking about strangers, you're talking about someone halfway around the world, like in a different culture, it can be extremely difficult to predict what they're going to do. We can guess that there's going to be, in general, more of an activity or less of an activity. But for each individual, because of the subjective value, because each individual determines how much something benefits them and how much it costs them, it's difficult to anticipate what each individual will do. So if you're trying to require someone to make the choice you want, or trying to, trick them to change the incentives so they do the thing you want, it's going to be very difficult to actually have that happen. Another idea is the law of diminishing marginal benefits. So as your consumption of a good increases, the marginal benefit is going to decrease over time. To make this a little less abstract, who likes pizza? Okay, a lot of people like pizza. How good is the first slice? All right, you bite into that and it feels amazing. It tastes great. How's the 10th slice?
Not good.
Yeah, a little rough, right? As you eat more and more pizza, each slice gives you less and less benefit. Some of that's because, you're getting more used to the taste. Some of it is you're just getting more full. And as great as it tastes, your stomach eventually starts to hurt and you have to stop eating. This is a very, very simple graph showing that. Here's the utility, and here's the number of slices of the pizza. So the first one's really high, the second one's good, not quite as good. Go on, until eventually that 11th slice of pizza, you're so full, it just hurts. You're not even getting any benefit from it. You're just getting the cost. Maybe for some of us, it's like the third slice of pizza that's too tough to eat. Maybe it's, closer to like 15 or 20. I don't know if there's any competitive eaters in here. So when we're looking at public policy, when we're looking at, say, pollution, or we're looking at education, we're looking at crime. It's not whether we should eliminate something or whether we should have something. The question should be, how much should we have? Eventually, as you get more and more of something, you're going to decrease the marginal benefits. It's even going to go negative. So it's not, these aren't all or nothing choices. Remember, we're thinking on the margin, so should we have more of something or less of something? All right. The last guidepost we're going to talk about today is incentives. Incentives matter. This is the most important concept that you're hopefully going to learn in this course. So incentives are what drives human action. Incentives, they shape what we do and encourage us to act in certain ways. And the reason I capitalized human action there is the economist Ludwig von Mises, his largest and like the peak of his work, his magnum opus, was the book Human Action, which was all about economics and understanding economics. He really wanted to drive home the point that we were studying human action. We weren't studying firms and businesses or why countries are rich, things like that. So, like I said on one of the previous slides, when the relative cost of an activity rises, we do less of it. It becomes more difficult, more costly, we're going to do less. When the cost of activity falls, we're going to do it more. It's going to be the same, but like reverse for benefits. So the benefits of something increase, we'll do more of it. The benefits of something decreases, we'll do less of it. All right, this is where I put those examples. So yeah, so if the cost of milk increases for whatever reason, fewer people are going to buy milk. Or people that buy milk are going to buy less of it. If you increase the cost of soup kitchens through whatever regulation, fewer soup kitchens, rainy weather reduces voting. All right. So obesity is rising in America for various different reasons. And the textbook asks, is one of those reasons health insurance? Oh, you can see obesity rates in 1994 and 2013. Obesity rates have increased a lot in the United States. Obviously, there's tons of reasons. Diet and exercise coming into play. But people with health insurance, and more people with health insurance now than they did in previous decades, people with health insurance have less incentive to stay healthy than people without health insurance. So Congress has done some studies, and when you hold constant factors like age, gender, income, so you basically compare someone with health insurance and someone without health insurance that are the same age, same gender, same income, same like across the board in like all these ways except for health insurance. People with health insurance tend to be more obese. They're responding to incentives. It's more costly to be obese. You end up with more health problems. But you don't have to pay as much for it. It's becoming less costly. So you're able to eat more, drink more, whatever it creates. And this is called moral hazard. As we'll end there today. Yeah. Next class we'll pick up with talking about moral hazard in the real world and how to prevent car accidents.